Still wasting your best years chasing a paycheck while the rest of us actually grow up? My brother didn't say it under his breath or pull me aside to say it privately. He said it in the middle of a private dining room at a restaurant in downtown Toronto, in front of 30 people who had gathered to celebrate my father's 60th birthday. He had a glass of Pinot Noir in one hand and the easy confidence of someone who had never once been told to be quiet. People stopped talking. Forks paused midair. My mother stared at the centerpiece. My father looked at the table. My brother smiled, like he had just said something clever. I smiled back. Then I said, calmly and clearly, so everyone in that room could hear me, "That's interesting. I'll have to tell my husband you said that." Every conversation in that room stopped at the same time. My name is Laurel Marsh. I'm 32 years old, and I work as an environmental project coordinator at a consulting firm with offices in Toronto and Ottawa. My job takes me to construction sites, municipal offices and hospital campuses across Ontario, reviewing impact assessments and making sure development projects meet environmental regulations. It's detail work, slow sometimes, and it doesn't come with a lot of glamour. But I built that career entirely on my own, without anyone in my family pointing me in the right direction or opening a door. That mattered to me, more than I could explain to people who had never had to earn their own footing. My brother was 3 years older than me and had, for as long as I could remember, occupied a different position in our family than I did. When he made the hockey team in high school, my parents put a photo on the mantle. When I made the honor roll, my mother said she was glad I was keeping myself busy. When he quit his first job after 2 months and moved back home, my father called it finding his path. When I moved to Toronto at 23, with a sublet apartment and a job offer I had worked 2 years to land, my grandmother asked my mother if I was running away from something. It was never anything dramatic. No screaming, no cruelty they would have recognized as cruelty. It was just the quiet and consistent message that what my brother did was worth celebrating, and what I did was simply expected. I got used to it the way you get used to a door that sticks. You stop expecting it to open easily, and you just push a little harder every time. After university, I threw myself into my work completely. I passed my professional certifications on the first attempt. I saved carefully for 2 years, before putting a down payment on a small condo in Scarborough, which I refinanced once my income grew. I paid my mortgage, my utilities, my student loans, all of it, without asking anyone for help. I didn't want help. I wanted to be someone who didn't need it. None of that came up at family dinners. The questions were always the same. Was I seeing anyone? Did I think about moving back closer to home? Did I ever worry about being alone? If I said I was doing well, the subject changed. If I mentioned work, someone would nod politely and then ask my brother about his weekend plans. I stopped expecting anything different. What I didn't expect was that things would quietly, completely change. I met my husband through work, the way most people meet the people they weren't looking for. My firm had been contracted to complete an environmental assessment for the expansion of an emergency department at a hospital in Mississauga. He was the ER physician who kept stopping by the site to ask about timelines, because he wanted to know when his department would finally have more space. He was direct and a little impatient, and he brought terrible coffee from the vending machine and apologized for it every single time. We talked properly for the first time during a break between site meetings. He asked what I was actually assessing, and I explained it in more detail than most people wanted, and he listened. Not the kind of listening where someone is waiting for their turn to speak. He genuinely wanted to understand. We kept running into each other over the following weeks, short conversations that lasted longer than they were supposed to. He remembered things I had mentioned in passing. He asked follow-up questions. He never tried to impress me, and he never talked over me, which was rarer than it should have been. A few months after the project wrapped, he asked if I wanted to get dinner. I said yes. It was the easiest yes I had ever said. He met my family about 6 months later, at Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house in Hamilton. He was quiet that evening, watching more than talking, which was his nature. On the drive back to Toronto, he asked me a question in the same measured way he asked about everything. Does your brother always talk to you like you're an afterthought? I told him that was just how family dinners went. He looked at the road for a moment, and then said, "That doesn't make it right." Nobody had ever said that to me so plainly before, not because they didn't care, but because most people assumed I had already made peace with it. He didn't assume anything, he just said what he saw. He never told me to cut anyone out or to stop going to family events. He never tried to make my decisions for me. He just reminded me, over and over in small ways, that I was allowed to protect the parts of my life that mattered to me. That keeping something precious away from people who had treated my happiness as a topic of discussion was not cowardice. It was care. When he proposed, it was at home on a Tuesday evening with no fuss and no audience. He just asked. And I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married at the end of April in a small ceremony with 12 people. Our closest friends, his sister, one of my colleagues who had become a real friend over the years. We had dinner afterward, and walked back to our condo through spring rain, and it was exactly the day I had always wanted. Quiet. Ours. We decided together not to tell my family right away, not to hide it out of shame, not to punish anyone. We had watched what happened every time I shared anything that mattered. It became material. Something to comment on, to question, to center other people's opinions around. I didn't want that for my marriage. I wanted to have it, to live inside it, to let it be real and settled before I handed it over to people who had never treated my happiness with care. We agreed that when the moment came, it would come on our terms. Neither of us expected it to arrive the way it did. In the middle of my father's birthday dinner, in a room full of relatives who had just watched my brother try to make me feel small. My father had turned 60 in October. My mother had spent weeks planning a dinner at a restaurant in downtown Toronto, a private room, a set menu, white tablecloths, 30 relatives and family friends. My brother had flown in from Calgary with his girlfriend, a woman he had been seeing for about a year. She seemed warm and genuine, the kind of person who laughed easily and listened to everyone at the table, not just the loudest voice. My husband was supposed to arrive later. He had an afternoon shift at the hospital that ended at 6, and the dinner was at 7. We had agreed he would come once he was done. I would get there first, and he would text me when he was close. I arrived early enough to greet people as they came in, to hug my aunts, to tell my father he looked well. The room felt warm at first, the way family gatherings do, before anyone has had too much wine or run out of safe topics. I found a seat near my cousin, and we caught up on things we had missed since the summer. My brother arrived about 20 minutes in, loud and charming the way he always was in group settings. He moved through the room with the ease of someone who had always been welcomed without having to earn it. He found me near the end of the table and said hello with a hug that lasted exactly as long as it needed to, no longer. It started gradually, the way these things always did. A comment about how I was still all the way in Toronto, as if distance were a personality flaw. A question from an uncle about whether I ever planned to slow down. My brother picking it up from there, making it into a bit of light entertainment for the table. A few people laughed. My mother smiled uncomfortably. My father looked at his bread plate. By the time the main course arrived, my brother had shifted the energy in the room entirely. He was telling a story about himself, a promotion at his firm in Calgary, a trip he and his girlfriend were planning, how settled everything finally felt. He paused at the end of it, looked straight across the table at me, and said the words that changed the entire evening. He smiled. The table waited. A few people laughed, the polite, nervous kind of laugh people make when they aren't sure what else to do. His girlfriend looked at him with an expression I couldn't quite read. My mother picked up her water glass. My father did not say a single word. And I smiled, because I had spent 32 years learning exactly how to smile in that particular moment. Then I said the thing I said. My brother laughed first, which was what I expected. He shook his head and said, "Come on, Laurel," in the tone people use when they think you've said something transparently desperate. A few people at the table looked uncertain, glancing between us. My mother frowned. My father looked up for the first time in several minutes. "Married?" My mother said it like a word in a foreign language. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at my phone, typed one message, and put it back in my pocket. Then I picked up my fork and went back to my meal. The table was quiet in a way it hadn't been all evening. 3 minutes passed. Maybe 4. My brother tried to restart a different conversation, but nobody picked it up properly. His girlfriend had gone very still. Then I heard the door to the private room open behind me, and I watched every face at the table look toward it at the same moment. My husband walked in still wearing the shirt he'd had on under his hospital jacket. He had come straight from his shift, and there was something about that. The fact that he had driven 40 minutes directly from the hospital to be there for this. That wasn't lost on me, even in that moment. He found me across the room in about 2 seconds. He walked over without hesitation, put a hand briefly on my shoulder and said, Sorry I'm late, the handover ran long. Then he looked at the table and introduced himself. I'm Laurel's husband. It's good to finally meet everyone. The room did not move. My brother stared at him with the expression of someone whose joke has just become unexpectedly complicated. His girlfriend looked at my husband, then at me, then at my brother. My mother pressed her fingers to her lips. My father set down his fork very slowly. My husband pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. Under the table he found my hand. On my left hand, the ring I had been wearing since April, the one I had simply not mentioned to anyone in that room, caught the candlelight. An aunt at the other end noticed it first, then a cousin. Then my mother's eyes landed on it and stayed there. My brother said, "This is a joke, right?" I took out my phone and opened my photos. I passed it down the table without saying anything. There we were, 12 people around a long dinner table, spring light coming through the windows, both of us laughing at something someone had just said, my dress still slightly damp from the rain we had walked through afterward. Our wedding. April, real and documented and not a joke. My husband had, in the bag he'd brought from work, a copy of our marriage certificate. We had needed it recently for a benefits update through his hospital and he hadn't yet moved it out of his bag. He set it on the table quietly. The same people who had laughed at my brother's comment 15 minutes earlier were not laughing now. My brother pushed back from the table. He pointed at me and said I had planned this, that I had timed it on purpose to humiliate him at our father's birthday. I looked at him steadily. You asked why I wasn't building a real life, I said. I answered the question. For the first time that evening, nobody rushed to fill the silence on his behalf. My aunt, my mother's older sister, who had driven down from Barry for the dinner, spoke first. Her voice was quiet but very clear. I've been watching you do this to her for 20 years, she said to my brother. I always thought someone else would say something. I should have been the one. My brother shook his head. That's not what this is. I remember when you told the whole family she was struggling after she moved to Toronto. My cousin said from across the table. He wasn't loud about it, he just said it. She had just gotten a promotion. You made it sound like she was failing. And at Grandma's 80th, another cousin said slowly, you told everyone she was too difficult to be in a relationship with, in front of her. I was kidding. She was sitting right there. One memory opened into another, the way they do when something has been held back for a long time and suddenly there is space for it. People spoke carefully, not trying to attack, just recounting what they had seen. A birthday where my brother had redirected attention away from a job I'd landed. A family barbecue where he had made a comment about my apartment that made several people laugh. Small things, each one forgivable in isolation, but together forming something much harder to look away from. His girlfriend had not said a word. She was listening to every person who spoke, and her face had changed completely from what it had been at the start of the evening. She had arrived knowing one version of this family. She was leaving with another. Eventually she looked at my brother and said very quietly, "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" He didn't answer her. She excused herself from the table a few minutes later and went to wait in the lobby. He followed her out. They didn't come back for the rest of the dinner. The room was different after they left. Quieter but not uncomfortable. My father finally spoke. He looked older than 60 suddenly, or maybe I was just seeing him differently. We let this go on longer than we should have, he said. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular. That's on us. My mother reached across the table toward me. I let her take my hand. She didn't try to explain or make excuses, which was the right thing. She just held my hand and looked at me, and I could see her working out how many years this covered. I had planned to wait to say the next thing. I had thought about it on the drive over and decided it wasn't the right time. But something about the room, the honesty in it, the way people were actually listening, changed my mind. I told them I was 10 weeks pregnant. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. My father stood up and hugged me before I had finished the sentence. My aunt laughed, the good kind of laugh, the kind that carries relief in it. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. It was not the birthday dinner anyone had planned. But in the way that matters most, it became the first honest gathering my family had ever had. In the weeks after, my phone had more messages in it than it had held in years. My aunt called the morning after and talked for a long time. She said she had stayed quiet because she told herself it wasn't her place, but she had known for years that it had gone too far. My cousin sent a long message saying he was sorry it had taken a public moment to make him say what he had known privately for a long time. I wrote back to everyone who reached out. I wasn't carrying anger. I had spent too many years being tired from carrying it. My brother did not contact me. Through other relatives, I heard that his girlfriend had ended things. Not that night in the lobby, but a few weeks later, after she had time to think through what she had witnessed. I didn't feel satisfaction at that. I felt something closer to sadness, the kind that comes when you understand that someone you grew up with never managed to see what they were doing until it was reflected back at them by someone they were trying to impress. My parents called the following month and asked if they could come to Toronto. We met at a cafe near our condo on a Saturday morning. My husband was there. He ordered coffee and mostly listened. My father said they had spent a lot of time talking after the dinner. He said he understood, for the first time, that staying quiet had not been neutral. It had been a choice, and every time they made that choice, I had to live with the consequences of it. He said he was sorry. My mother said she had convinced herself that I was strong enough to handle it, as if that were a reason rather than an excuse. She said she wanted to do better. I told them what I believed to be true, that forgiveness and trust were not the same thing, and that I forgave them because carrying 32 years of weight was too heavy for me, not because the hurt hadn't been real. I told them that trust would take time, and that it would be built by what they did going forward, not by what they promised over coffee that morning. They both nodded. Neither of them argued with any of it, which told me more than any promise would have. We hugged in the parking lot and drove home in separate directions. It wasn't a resolution, it was a beginning, uncertain and slow, and that was exactly what it deserved to be. Our daughter was born the following spring. We brought her home to the condo and put her in the room we had repainted twice, before finally getting the color right. My husband came home from shifts and sat on the floor next to her while she slept, like he couldn't quite believe she was there. We ordered too much food and watched bad television and didn't sleep nearly enough, and it was the most peaceful I had felt in my entire adult life. That Thanksgiving, we hosted for the first time. A small group, my aunt, 2 cousins, a friend from work and her partner, and my parents who showed up early and asked how they could help. My mother washed dishes without being asked. My father played music from his phone and danced with my daughter in the kitchen while I finished making gravy. It was quiet and ordinary, and nothing like the dinners I had spent my whole childhood enduring. At one point, I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room and watched all of it without anyone noticing me. My husband caught my eye from across the room, and I could tell from his expression that he knew exactly what I was thinking. People talk about getting even like it requires a dramatic moment, a confrontation, a scene that forces the people who hurt you to admit what they did. That moment happened to me, without me planning it, in a restaurant in downtown Toronto on a Thursday evening in October. But that wasn't the part that changed my life. What changed my life was quieter than that. It was finishing a project I was proud of and coming home to someone who asked about it because he genuinely wanted to know. It was choosing what to share and with whom, and not apologizing for the choice. It was understanding that protecting something that matters to you is not the same as running from something that hurt you. My brother had spent years trying to make me feel like a person who wasn't quite enough, and I had spent years hoping that one day, with enough patience, something would shift. People don't change because you wait for them to. They change, if they change at all, because something inside them finally decides to. I stopped waiting. I built something instead, and by the time anyone noticed what I had built, it was already finished, already real, already mine in a way that no one else's opinion could touch. That turned out to be more than enough.